Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We'll go ahead and get started for the public meeting for the Food Safety Program for produced water use within Region 5. So anyway, I'm Clay Rogers. I'm an Assistant Executive Officer with the Central Valley Water Board. It looks like for the most part we have pretty familiar faces today. I think we've had enough of these meetings that we're starting to know everybody, so I think I'll bypass some of the formal introductions in the interest of time and go ahead and get started. So, Josh, you want to go over the agenda review?
Yeah, today on the agenda, we're going to do some brief introductions of everyone on the panel, and then we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Vengosh. He's doing the Duke University study. For people on the phone, looks like we're getting a little feedback. If you can mute your device when you're not talking, please. There we go. Thank you. So we're going to have a presentation by Dr. Vengosh, and then we're going to go over the meeting summary for November 14th, and then we're going to talk about the Task 1, 2, and 3 reports, and we're going to do another update on panel recommendations along with the white paper, and then we'll do some general public comments. So I guess we'll go right on to Dr. Vengosh's presentation.
And I'll add one thing, unless somebody wants to do introductions, but I think most everybody knows everybody. So I was just in the interest of time thinking we would probably skip that formality today. And we'll go ahead and get started with Dr. Vengosh's presentation, and maybe Will wants to, Dr. Stringfellow wants to say something for just a moment.
Hi, this is Will Stringfellow, Science Advisor. I just want to introduce Dr. Vengosh a little bit. Dr. Vengosh is at Duke University. I'm sure he'll talk more about his credentials. He's a very well-renowned scientist in this field. And Dr. Vengosh had been funded by, I believe, the USDA to investigate practices of reuse of produced water. And particularly, they got interested in sites in California. So, Dr. Vengosh, are you available?
Yeah. I'm here.
Okay, we're getting a lot of feedback, but we'll try to manage it, but I'll let you take it away. Thank you for presenting to this audience.
Sure. Thank you, Will, and thank you for being here. I hope I called, but it was huge echo. Can you hear me well?
Dr. Vengosh, hold on for a second.
Yeah, so Dr. Vengosh, if you can mute, because you're on the cell phone, you're on your phone, if you can mute your Skype screen, this way it's not picking up on the laptop as well. It looks like we're getting a little echo.
Okay, so hold on.
There we go. Yep, that's it. So now if you can, oh no, all right, now try speaking. Oh.
Is he the only one on the conference line?
No, we have David Mazzara and Ken Clark on as well.
Exploring new technology here.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We're getting a recommendation to just try to talk through your computer and to hang up the phone.
Yes. That's what I do now. Okay. So I try to be brief with some major points. We the USDA to conduct a study, which I'm going to show you some highlights today. And we are a group of researchers from
All right, hold on one sec. I apologize. We're still getting a little bit of feedback. We're trying to work on something on our side. My apologies.
Sure.
All right, go ahead and try again.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Sure. So in addition to Duke University, there is RTI International in the Research Triangle Park, Pacific Institute, and people from Department of Physics Engineering in California State University in Bakersfield. Basically, as you know, wastewater is a major issue in the United States, and we have, my group at Duke University has investigated different aspects of the water quality, the source, the volume associated with flowback and produced water from conventional and unconventional wastewater. We know that the major challenges in management of wastewater is the injection and deep injection well induces seismicity. The treatment is very costly and also associated with water contamination. And we've been engaged in several studies where wastewater, produced water were discharged into rivers in Pennsylvania, and we learned what's in it and how it's affect the environment. Basically, the reuse is one of the issues, and beneficial use is kind of the promising way to deal with it. And we are focusing, of course, here on irrigation water and what would be the limiting factor for reusing wastewater. We try to look at it in more wider perspective, not only California, but more wider through the state, through the country and other basins. Focusing on California, as you know, that in the Kern Tulane Water District has been using for decades oil-produced water, which is the focus of the study. And basically, we had several stages in our evaluation. First, we characterized the chemistry of oil-field produced water in the Southern Central Valley. This is part with collaboration with the USGS that have a kind of major study on that. All over the state, we are focusing on Kern County and looking at the data that the USGS generated and some sample that we collected as part of this study. We published a study in Applied Geochemistry in 2018, looking at the chemistry of the water. And one of the major results of that I'm sure you're all aware, but we demonstrated again that we see the large differential in salinity of oil-produced water in the western versus the eastern part of the valley, where oil field from Beltridge and Lost Hills would have very high salinity relative to the eastern part of the valley. And we are showing huge variation in salinity between seawater salinity of chloride concentration of over 20,000 milligram per liter down to even 100 to 200 milligram per liter of a very low salinity in the oil-produced water in the eastern part of the valley, which, as we can see, is the key for ability to use this oil-field water for irrigation. And we also found that in spite of the relatively low salinity of the oil-field water from the eastern part of the valley, they're still characterized by relatively high boron to chloride ratios, high boron concentration, some of them exceeding 1 milligram per liter, even for very diluted low saline water. And this is something that is kind of characteristic for all oil-produced water in California that are a bit distinguishedly higher with the boron relative to other places in different parts of the country. And this will be a subject of a new study that we hope to use isotope to understand why we see this relatively boron enrichment in oilfield water in overall in those produced water in California. The second part of our study, once we understand the oil field water, we understand what is the water quality of the water used for irrigation and what will be the impact on the soil. And doing so, we collected a new sample. We collected more oil field produced water that we have access. We collected oil produced water from a dire creek where we actually have access directly, kind of an experimental system. It's not like used by the county, but used locally, how oil field water used directly for small irrigation. And that was very interesting because different salinity and a different condition. We sampled as many samples as we could from the Coelho Canal water, and we also sampled local groundwater to give reference to the data that we collected from the Coelho Canal. Overall, 51 water samples were analyzed in our study. And we compared the new data that we generated also to archive data that was able to retrieve from different data sets from both oil produced water within the Kern County between 1985 to 2016, and the Coelho water themselves, again, at the same time frame, and compare it to our own data, new data that we generated, and we see very nice systematic results when you're looking at the chloride concentration, and we see that the dilution one-to-one of the oil produced water indeed generate about 50% of the salinity, and our data, the long-term data and the new data is pretty consistent and showing a similar result, which is always good kind of confirmation for that what we're doing is correct. Likewise, we compared the archive data for boron for oil produced water to the Coelho water itself for both archive and the new data, and show similar result here as well. The important things is that the concentration of boron in the Coelho Canal are below the 1 milligram per liter that is used as a threshold for water quality guidelines. Likewise, the arsenic that we measured, and we see the effect of the dilution of that. Some people focus on arsenic. We can discuss that. It's above the 10 parts per billion threshold of drinking water, not irrigation water. But this is kind of as a reference, just to make sure we understand that. And basically, the results show, if we look at all contaminants available, looking at a basin plan recommended level, we're looking at the EPA primary drinking water maximum contaminant level, and looking at the EPA secondary drinking water standard, all marked with red lines.
Dr. Van
You see that if you're looking at all contaminants in water, inorganic contaminants that we analyze, trace metal and major element, that we see that beside the boron in some cases and arsenic that I mentioned, all other water quality parameters, maybe nitrate in some cases, are higher, but we're talking about irrigation water, so it's not relevant. But otherwise, we see that all of those, all the contaminant level are below the either recommended basin plan levels or drinking water primary and secondary regulation. So this diagram shows that the quality is it's pretty good and very much consistent actually with the quality of the local groundwater. So this is really important kind of implication that beside boron and beside the issues of the arsenic, we see that the level of inorganic contaminants are really consistent and below the different threshold values one would consider as risk for human. And also only boron seems to be higher in Coelho water relative to groundwater. and I'm going to show that in a minute as well. In addition to that, to measuring the water quality, we measure also the soil. We work with some local farmers who gave us access to the farm, and combined with measuring the water used for irrigation, we collected some soil. We collected soil that were irrigated directly by oil field produced water in this Dyer Creek. We collected 16 soil samples that were irrigated by the Coelho Canal water, and 14 soil samples that were irrigated by local groundwater, overall of 33 soil samples. And when we analyze the soil sample, we notice that we can see systematic quality variation that's consistent with the quality of the irrigated water. For example, for the chloride that you look now, we see that the Dyer Creek has relatively high chloride of about 450 milligram per liter, associated with the high chloride in milligram per kilogram values in the soil, relatively to the Coelho Canal, which much lower salinity and much in the water and the soil, and groundwater with lower, similar lower salinity in the water and in the soil. And when we look at sodium, we see a similar systematic higher concentration of sodium result with a higher sodium in the soil with very high SAR values relative to water from the soil from the Coelho Canal and soil from irrigated with groundwater. We do see systematic higher SAR values in soil irrigated by Coelho Canal relative to soil irrigated by local groundwater. And that is important to remember for later, that we didn't see with the chloride. Likewise, with the boron, we see that higher boron in irrigation water results higher boron in the soil. We see it in the Dyer Creek, we see it in the Coelho Canal soil, and we see it in the groundwater. So definitely we see the difference in boron in soil relative to the in soil irrigated by Coelho Canal relative to soil irrigated by groundwater. So that's very also important to notice this as we move on. And also we conducted measurements of the radioactivity of the soil. This is important because previous studies have shown that oil-produced water across the country would typically has, when we're talking about saline water, high radioactivity, which means high level of radionuclides, specifically radium-226 and radium-228. And typically when this water interacts with soil, it has been demonstrated that the radium would start to accumulate in the soil in such circumstances. Our results show that there's no radium, and we systematically measure that, and we do not see any difference in the radium activity between unirrigated soil, soil irrigated with groundwater, soil irrigated by blend, oil-produced water from the Coelho Canal, and soil irrigated directly by the Dyer Creek oil-produced water. And the ratios, the radium-228 to radium-226 is consistently similar, meaning that it's all naturally occurring and not coming from oil-produced water. So we rule out any radioactivity that we have seen in other places where the water, oil-produced water, was much higher in salinity. We don't see it here. And we don't see any radium accumulation at all. So overall, when we're looking at the impact on soil quality, and we see that indeed, if we have high saline like the Dyer Creek, it will reflect higher saline produced water. It reflected much higher chloride, sodium, boron, and arsenic. You can see that, and also in new data that we generated recently suggests that dissolved organic carbon in the soil will be much higher in the Dyer Creek, where much higher concentration of dissolved organic carbon were observed relative to soil irrigated by other source of water, It's important to see that the boron and sodium in a blended oil-produced water coming from the Coelho Canal is higher than the local groundwater. And this is kind of important, again, to make sure we see this kind of accumulation of sodium and boron in the soil because of using Coelho Canal relative to, as compared to local groundwater. So one of the take-home messages from that is that the smaller change in salinity could have important implications for the accumulation of those inorganic constituents, which are important for soil and sustainability of irrigation and crop production, like sodium, which affect the soil permeability, boron, which has important toxicity effect on plant, and dissolved organic carbon as well. So using diluted oil-produced water for irrigation seems to be important. And even if it's diluted, we'd still see higher boron and sodium. So if you increase this concentration by stopping dilution, you would induce higher concentration of those elements in the soil and could potentially risk not as much as the fruit safety that we're going to talk in a minute, but mostly for sustainability and for soil operation. And the final kind of stage of our research is preliminary at that point, but it's, I think, still consistent. We conducted research on measuring actual product, and we focus on pistachio that was grown from using a Coelho Canal water. We had some samples that were collected from other parts in the Central Valley, and we had actual physical pistachio that we looked both in the literature and actually got the sample from Turkey and conducted the measurement ourselves to make sure that we have a good reference to the pistachio that we physically measured in Coelho areas. And when we compare the data from literature data that you can see in the box plot here, relative to the new data in red from the Central Valley, relative to the new data in gray from the Coelho Canal, relative to the new data from Turkey and Central Valley that we measured ourselves, we don't see any much different. We don't see any systematic difference for major element. And we also, when we look at the trace element that, and metals that could induce human health effect, we don't see any violation in the Coelho pistachio. And I'm very careful, we have only 2 samples from the Coelho, but it's all systematically showing low arsenic concentration. In fact, in arsenic, the literature data from Iran showing much higher concentration of arsenic in the pistachio than what we see in the Central Valley or in general, and Coelho in particular, and all other elements show very kind of systematic low concentration. I believe there is a need for much more comprehensive evaluation of that. I think that will help a lot the public opinion and the grower as well, if we will continue this type of measurement and have much larger scope and larger number of sample, we're able to analytically develop that very precise measurement. And we see it's really nicely consistent with the literature data. So we feel very confident about the quality of those analyses. And basically my suggestion to the board to consider expanding this type of research, maybe also for almonds as well, not only pistachio, that can provide kind of an indirect and objective evaluation of the risk for those products. And I think that could take a lot of suspicion, so to speak, among some of people in the public related to the potential of use of oil-produced water in the Coelho and maybe elsewhere for the potential
of accumulation of metal in agriculture products. But definitely our results here for the few sample we collected showing no accumulation of metals in those samples. And it's ironically that the arsenic we found is lower than the literature from Iran kind of reported in previous study in Iran. So no metal accumulation. Again, I take it with some caution. It's preliminary data given the number of it, but in terms of analytical kind of quality, we feel very good about the quality of this data. So overall, we show that inorganic and trace element content in the Coelho Canal are comparable to the concentration measured in local groundwater and below the upper limit defined by the base plane recommended level, drinking water, MCL, and EPA secondary drinking water regulation, except for the arsenic that I mentioned before, and there are also some exceedances in iron and manganese, but very small part, and we are not using the water for drinking, so one would argue that those standards are not really important here, but more important is the basin plan recommended level. And we found that the salinity of irrigation water really key, and it's controlled the chloride and sodium content of the irrigation soil. We see high sodium and therefore SAR values in the Coelho Canal water and the soil that being irrigated relative to soil irrigated by a groundwater. So we do see accumulation of sodium and boron in the soil irrigated by Coelho Canal. We think that long-term irrigation with the Coelho Canal water, which is 50% diluted of the original low saline oil-produced water, even though it results in higher boron accumulation in the soil relative to soil irrigated by local groundwater, and boron therefore could be a long-term limiting factor, at least for sensitive crops that would have much more low tolerance for boron toxicity, given the accumulation of boron in the soil. We didn't see any radium accumulation in the soil, which is very important from human health perspective. And in the preliminary data, we do not see metal accumulation in the pistachio irrigated by oil-produced water relative to pistachio collected from other areas in Central Valley or from overseas. So looking very carefully on the inorganic chemistry, we see very low risk for using low saline or produced water for irrigation. And the salinity is a critical factor. Using low saline or produced water in dilution of the Coelho or oil-produced water, we think it's critical for sustainable utilization of this water for irrigation, and would argue to reconsider thoughts that I heard when I participated in previous meeting for stopping the dilution to have some water saving. That could result, as we see here in our kind of sensitivity test, with further accumulation of boron and potentially longer term risk for boron toxicity and sodium accumulation in oil-produced soil, irrigated soil. So that's kind of the short, try to make it as fast as I can, the result of our study.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bengosh,
okay.
can you hear us? We weren't sure. Avner, can you hear us?
Yeah, now I do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I believe was there a question, Barbara? Did you?
We were trying to figure out the units in the early slides on arsenic, because I think they're micrograms, not milligrams.
The question is where?
Maybe slide 5, something like that.
The question was, what are the units for the arsenic slides that you put up?
It's a parts per billion. I think there is a typo there. Yes, here it's a typo. It's microgram per liter. It's
Okay.
ppb, obviously.
Thank you.
We thought those were pretty high. On
Yeah,
slide,
it's not
on
really-
slide 21, I think. If you can bring that up.
Sorry.
On slide 21, by the way, this is quite interesting data. If you can bring up your, I call it a slide.
Which one? You,
21.
oh, I'm not showing the number. 21. Okay. This one.
Yes, Bruce and I were looking again at the arsenic, and would be
Yeah,
interested.
it's microgram per kilogram.
Well, but the box plots with the mean clear at the bottom of the box suggest that there's a couple of pretty high values there. Is that true?
We're looking here.
Or dire
Yeah, on the Dwyer Creek plot, the orangey one, the median is about, or the median or average is consistent with all the others. And it would appear that there is one or more outliers that are very, very high that affecting that distribution there.
Correct.
That's a question.
Yeah, so apparently you do see higher range.
But I'm not seeing any individual data points. I assume that the couple clear up there at this, probably the 75th percentile that's driving that.
Yes, the box reflects 75th percentile. I don't have the right now, but apparently, yes, this is reflecting a wider range, higher values of arsenic. This is in soil.
What's the total number of samples there, Abner?
I need back. Hold on.
For Dwyer Creek. Excuse me, for Dwyer Creek.
Yeah. So for the soil, 3.
So
Yes, so definitely showing a range of 3 samples. So take it with caution. I agree. Whereas the others reflect much larger data set.
okay. Do we have other questions?
Basically, the dry creek showing all over the range that you can find. And that's something that you would expect given the nature of, it's not like one place that irrigate constantly like a normal irrigation. It's here and there. You may take soil that's been irrigated directly from the oil produced water, and just next to it, a few feet, you would have water that is just naturally soil or kind of water. So it could be anything in those, because it's not, it's kind of a local site. It's not like a place where we see in this figure that is being constantly irrigated with the same water for decades in the same location.
Dr. Van Gosh, thank you for your presentation. This is Seth Shonkoff from PSC and UC Berkeley. 2 questions. One is, what were the limiting factors for obtaining more samples? I see it, an N of 2 for pistachios and, an N of 3 at Dwyer Creek for soil samples. Just interested in what the limiting factors were for you obtaining more samples. And then I actually forgot my second question, so while you're talking, I'll try to remember. Thank you very much.
Sure. So it's a funny question. I mean, Will can elaborate that. When we started the project, we got pretty resistance to our research. And 2 weeks ago, when we have the conference in Bakersfield, some people really stayed out that they were not very happy with our ability or intention to conduct the research. So we had to, working against the wall in order to get sample, and without the kind of blessing the local authority. And that's made the result why we are limited in our sampling ability. If now things are clear out, I hope maybe that will provide us more accessibility and ability to collect more sample, but it was really challenging to get sample. That's unfortunate, so we try to make from what we have. But it's kind of very interesting how we had really to work very hard. A lot of energy went into obtain sample, and just through interaction directly with the farmers, and able kind of to break this wall and able to get sample.
Thank you for that. I also remembered my other question, which is about the soil analysis and whether you were able to adjust for soil type and soil history. My understanding is that soil type might modify some of the results irrespective of application of different types of water to the soil. Thank you.
Sure. We didn't systematically evaluate soil sources, but what we did a relatively short distance from different places, assuming that there's no dramatic change in the soil property, the factor that we use, or what kind of water has been used over the long term in those sites. So with consulting with the farmers, local farmers, they told us this soil we use with the Coelho Canal water versus local groundwater. And we try to take sites where it's solely being irrigated by those 2 different water sources. And also the measurement is not total, it's not full digestion that the soil property will play into it, but it's more extraction of the salt and measuring the dissolved constituents upon a soil saturation, which I believe the soil property itself would have some, but not dramatic effect. So, but the really bottom line to answer the question is that we're not talking about different areas, very close, relatively close to each other, which assume that the principal soil properties are similar.
Hi, this is Gabrielle Ludwig with the Almond Board of California. My question is really more one, I thought it was interesting how you did the comparisons with pistachios from other sources. For me, it's more on the water quality side. When we look at surface water quality in California,
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
yeah, I was just told that I wasn't close enough to the mic. So you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So Gabrielle Ludwig, Almond Board of California. What I was curious about is whether you compared any of the water qualities to other sources of irrigation water in California. Certainly for us in almonds, we have research that's been going on and off for years on boron, where we have surface water supplies that are high in boron, or other places where we're too low in boron. So it's this really narrow area. I know arsenic has cropped up in some areas. So I'm just curious if any effort is made to compare the water qualities or for these elements with other sources of irrigation water outside of Kern County that are used.
Right. No, we did not. I mean, we follow. We kind of focus on the Coelho Canal water with respect to normalize it to local groundwater to see if we see systematic variation and differential impact on the soil. And we did not expand it behind to surface water from other sources. And I certainly aware of the boron and the narrow range of toxicity versus efficiency that associate with boron in irrigation water, but we did not address that in this study. Our focus was much more narrow to see the impact of of irrigation with Coelho Canal. What's in the Coelho Canal? That was our major purpose here. And given what I mentioned earlier with the limitation to access, that we were not very welcome in the area, what you are suggesting would be even more impossible kind of study, which I really important to do, absolutely.
Abner, I think there's another question? Okay. Do we have any more questions?
This is Bruce Mackler with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Are you planning on doing more work in this area? Are you going to be looking to try and get expanded access to the water or to the pistachios or soil or such?
We would love to. The problem, there are two issues here. One is that our USDA kind of project is coming to end, and I believe in a month or two. So we are ending this project. I think that one of the losing ends is the pistachio, and we are, given that we established the analytical kind of tools and ability to conduct this, I think there is a lot of merit to continue to do this in the future. If someone in this audience can think about the mechanism to do the study, I will be very happy to do so.
Dr. Vengash, this is Seth Shonkoff again, PSC and UC Berkeley. I just want to echo the importance of access to data. It's something that has been a concern of the panel for some time. So access to data enables effective risk management. So thank you for your work there. The other question that I had is you made the assumption that the Coelho Water District dilutes by 50% their produced water, and I'm just wondering if you might be able to opine on the possibility of what it would look like if they didn't cut their produced water with 50% other water sources. Since that does happen as access to other water resources during times of drought, my understanding, and I could be corrected, but my understanding is that ratio has also gone to 80% produced water, 20% other. And we also have other water districts that are accepting produced water that's with no dilution. So I'm just, based on your work, based on the analyses that you've undertaken, if you might offer some of your thoughts on that subject. Thanks.
Sure. So if we look at this diagram, we see that over long term, the difference between the oil produced water and the flow water is about half, which reflecting the mixing relationship. The importance of this a site from the Dow that we see it here in this diagram demonstrate that small changes in the salinity between 80 to chloride of 80 to 150 or something could have an implication for chloride, but even for sodium and even more for boron. So I believe that if we stop dilution of even the low saline oil produced water, we're increasing our risk of boron and sodium accumulation in the soil. Now, the question is what kind of crops we're doing and what is the sensitivity of different crops for boron. One would argue that some crops could well in much higher boron concentration in the soil, and the sodium SAR is not as critical. That's a matter of kind of probably discussing more with ag folks that would know where is the exact threshold from which boron start to be extremely really causing toxicity and on the crops. Definitely we see a very tight relationship between the salinity of the irrigation water and the boron and sodium accumulating in the soil. So we see a very close association, for me, indicating that you're putting more risk, again, not on the health issues related to the crops, but more on the sustainability of the soil and for long term, how the soil would and how the crops will react under condition of accumulation of boron and sodium. And where do you reach to the level that it's becoming, that different crops becoming not tolerant to those level of boron. So one can be very cautious in kind of releasing those dilution mixing relationship, because even though they are not really violating drinking water regulation or basin level regulation, I think the really important take-home message of this study is that you do affect the salt and boron that accumulates in the soil. And so those small variations could have long-term implication on the soil quality. I hope this addressed your question.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Vengosh. This is Clay Rogers from the Central Valley Water Board. I don't have a specific question, but I think a person or two in the audience here may have a question, so I want to invite them to ask their questions. I believe Bill Aliud has a question. He can introduce himself and we'll go from there. Thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Sure.
We're working on the microphone, Abner.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I am Bill Alio. I do government affairs for the Environmental Working Group here in Sacramento. I've been following this issue for about 3 years. A few questions. One on the water samples. Were you allowed to randomly take the water samples, or did the water districts or the other sites say, now, come in and take it now? Because my concern is, we've expressed this, is depending on when you inject a large amount of fresh water to blend, you could definitely skew the way the samples come out.
Well, when we collect sample from the farmers, with the farmers. So there was no any way that the authorities could know what water they are providing to the farmers. This was done in different times, kind of irregular. And the fact that we are very consistent in archive data that was reported in the last 15 years or so, meaning that there's no any bias just because of the specific operation of the water. So we were not given water in the time which was convenient, so to speak. So
Got
it
it.
was like a random sample with the farmers as the water from and to the farmers, and then we could analyze.
Got it. Thank you. On boron, there's a well-known case from southern Kern County Star Farms where a lot of almond trees were ruined by excessive boron due to percolation from some produced water ponds just to the north of his property. And there's another lawsuit, I'm not sure what happened to it, about cherry trees affected by, I think it was also boron. I just tried to pull up on my phone the levels of boron in the Star Farms situation that obviously were great enough to kill thousands of trees, and compare them to what you're finding now in this sample. I can't do it now over the phone apparently, but I think it's something good to look at. Are the levels of boron approaching cautionary levels in this part of the valley that occurred in the Star Farms situation, or possibly was it Pala Farms was the other one? And I see maybe Clay wants to comment on this, but I just raised that question. When is too much enough? Too much.
Well, I can't speak to specific numbers that Star had in their wells for Star Farms, but I can speak a little bit to the wastewater that was discharged, and that wastewater was from the west side where extremely high salinities, very high boron levels. I believe, and I'm kind of looking at my staff, the boron levels are well north of 20 milligrams per liter boron, even up around 40 or 50, I believe, in some of the samples from the west side fields. So, and the chloride concentrations are in the thousands of milligrams per liter, not down around 150, 200. So, we do have the water quality objective in our basin plan for boron for agriculture, and that's the 1 milligram per liter concentration that Dr. Vengosh identified with the red line on some of his charts. There are waters being used on the west side of the valley, particularly when not all the surface waters are available, that are very saline and contain quite a bit of salinity. Those are handled by management practices that are implemented by the farmers in order to not to be able to deal with the soil toxicity issues. But we are sensitive to those issues. But the waters from the west side are extremely different than the waters from this small number of fields on the east side of the valley that has much better water quality.
Got it. And I obviously don't want to tell farmers how to do their business. They're, I'm sure, extremely sensitive to saline levels and boron levels. They don't want to kill their crops. So I just remember that case. Then, Doctor, I see the constituents you tested for were kind of the traditional ones that there are MCLs for from US EPA, et cetera. Did you look across the board in these soil samples or in the water samples for other organic or inorganic chemicals that are more offbeat, that are not boron, arsenic, the radionucleotides, et cetera, things that the oil companies are using upstream that are a little more exotic and something that there aren't drinking water standards for exactly. So did you screen the soil for what's in this soil, or just look for the constituents which you reported on today?
So we did not look at organic constituents in the water and the soil. I believe there are other studies parallel to that, and probably will elaborate on that. So we kind of having a separation of operation. We deal with inorganic. The only thing I can comment on this thing is that we did measure total dissolved organic carbon. And even that, we find that the concentration of dissolved organic carbon in the Kawelo Canal water is extremely low relative to other oil-produced water that we have looked at previously in other places. But we did not look at the different, as you call it, exotic organic constituents that are associated with oil operation.
So we have some data from a facility that's adjacent to the Star Farms area. It wasn't the ponds that were at issue, but same kind of pond system, if you're interested, Bill. The TDS was about 20,000, the boron's about 70. And the chloride...
What are the boron levels in the Duke study? I can't remember the number.
In our study, the highest, the Kawelo Canal, it would be less than 1 millimeter per liter.
What was that? Thanks.
Less than 1, and the chloride was about 11,000.
Thank you. And then I think I missed how long your study's going to go for. I think you said USDA funding is ending. What's left in your study? When will the final report be out? And are you done gathering data because you're out of money? What's your status of further research in this part of Kern County?
So yes, so the USDA study indeed is completed. Again, it was limited for 3 years with limited funding. The other outcome of this project is some risk assessment that RTI is working right now on it. And I believe there will be 2 scientific publications coming out. One is what I showed you today, is a paper under review. And once, if accepted, this will be published, will be a scientific publication that could be part of the public information, obviously. And the second paper is about risk that RTI is conducting, is trying to do modeling of possible accumulation of different inorganic constituents that could generate from that kind of irrigation water and so on. So if someone coming tomorrow and saying we have funding to conduct A, B, and C, we certainly, for something, I mean, not for example, we are not equipped for organic chemistry, we're not there, it's not our field, but for doing trace element in pistachio, for example, I think we kind of developed the analytical method for very precise and correct way to do it. So we certainly will welcome other opportunities to continue the research and address some of the strength, some of the points that we could not do until now.
Thank you. That may have been a premature question. I suppose we'll get to next steps later in this agenda. Sorry about that. Thank you for your answers.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions? Looks like we have at least one more.
My name is David Onsalabaher, manager of Coelho Water District. On slides 18 and 19, you have the difference in groundwater and produced water on the different constituents. Is the water the only thing different in those 2 soils, or are there different soil amendments that may be attributing to the higher values?
Yes, we don't. There's a boron or sodium amendment into the water, especially in the Dwyer Creek. There's no any amendment whatsoever. So, and also when talking to farmers, there was no any addressing any kind of additional water addition of boron, for example, sodium, definitely not sodium. So we don't think that the additional of external source of boron is any factor in our evaluation.
Thank you.
Anybody else with any questions in the room or on the phone?
Yeah, we got a couple questions through an email. So we got 5 questions. This is from Justin Bass. So I'm going to read them one at a time and give you an opportunity to answer each. So first question is, you tested only 2 samples of pistachios. That means 2 pistachios or 2 baskets full of pistachios. Please clarify. And then will you do more samples on pistachios?
2 batches, not 2 individual pistachios.
Okay.
2 from 2 sites.
Okay. And then the next question is,
the next part, we would love to do more. We definitely think there need to be more. In order to do more, probably we'll need 2 things. We need funding, and we need more, even more important, the welcome and collaboration with the local community that was not really provided previously, unfortunately.
Okay. And then the next question is, are Iran and Turkey using oil-filled wastewater to grow pistachios? Are you, Dr. Vengash, using the same testing methods as provided by Iranian and Turkish literature? What is the literature from Iran and Turkey?
So if someone would contact me, I can send the papers that we use. They are not using oil-produced water whatsoever. It could be that some of the high arsenic they found in their study is related to local groundwater with high arsenic. Arsenic is very common in some groundwater system around the world. What we did in order to take away the analytical factors that we compare to the literature, we purchased pistachio from Turkey and from Iran. And we know that is irrigated and grown in those countries, brought them to our lab and analyzed them in the same way we analyze pistachio from California. So in this way, we kind of normalized and took out any analytical bias that could be conducted in other labs in those countries.
Okay. And the next question is, you noted boron as a factor for sensitive crops. What are the sensitive crops? Which fruits, nuts, and vegetables specifically are sensitive to boron?
There are a list of fruits, oranges, for example, avocado. I need to look at the list. Right now, don't recall all of them. There are different tolerance among the different crops, but some of them are known to be much more boron sensitive than others.
Question number 4. Are you concerned about arsenic in your test samples being above the level for drinking water? I know the oil-filled wastewater is being used for growing food crops and not drinking, but we are using drinking water standards, correct? Since arsenic is above drinking water standards in your test samples, does that cause some concern for you? We are talking about our food here.
Well, we did not find arsenic in the few samples we analyzed. We do not find much larger arsenic in soil that we analyze relative to local groundwater. The fact that there is a local groundwater finds similar level of arsenic. One would argue that, I'm not trying to protect the oil-produced water industry in California, but the arsenic issue should not be a factor to my mind because, yes, it is used for food, but the fact that we see the local groundwater having similar concentration that we see in the oil-produced water, kind of taking out this factor for, against the oil-produced water specifically. We use this standard as a reference, but if it's really incorporates into the soil and from there into the crops, it's a big question. It's important if you use this water for irrigation of strawberries, for example, then you should worry because it could be residual water and direct contact. If you use it for almonds and pistachio, it's a different kind of a ball game. So I think what type of agriculture, when you're using water that would have slightly elevated arsenic above the MCL, could also play into that. But the bottom line is, I don't think that arsenic is a key factor for using oil-produced water in California. For me, it's actually the boron, even though it's not toxic, it's more important because it's more reflecting the ability to farmers to do this in the long run and to able to prevent boron toxicity. And then I think it's really important rather than a slim risk of arsenic impact.
And the last question is, any chemicals unknown? Did you test for all oil industry chemicals used in fracking or other enhanced recovery techniques used in 2020? Did you detect any chemicals that are unknown? Are there any unknown chemicals from oil drilling in your samples?
No, we did not add the organic constituents that are associated with hydraulic fracturing, cleaning wells, all the extensive chemicals that were previously being measured by well. So we didn't touch those and we did not include it in our study.
Thank you. That's all the questions from Justin Bass.
And if there are no more questions, we would like to thank you very much, Dr. Vengash, for your time and your presentation. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Talking to you again. With that, would we like to take a 5-minute break, or do we want to move on?
Thanks, Avner.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
Break or plow ahead? 5-minute break. We are on break.
Let's see if we can go ahead and get started. Okay, looks like we're ready to get started again. So with that, I'll let GSI do an update on the Task 1 report.
Thank you. We've been asked to just give a brief update on where we are with our 3 tasks. So as an overview, the 3 tasks, the first one is the identification selection of these chemicals of interest from the full list of chemicals, which include both naturally occurring and additive chemicals that have been declared by the producers. The second is a literature review, which focuses on these chemicals of interest or the context of produced water reuse in agriculture. The third is the results from sampling and chemical analysis of crops that were irrigated with produced water and compared against crops that were irrigated with conventionally sourced water in the Central Valley. So as an update to Task 1, just briefly talking about the outcome of Task 1, presented a number of times here to the panel and board. Started with 399 chemicals. We went through this process and identified toxicity values for some of the chemicals for 130, derived some toxicity values based on available animal studies for those that did not have agency-derived toxicity values. We're able to then categorize or identify data gaps based on available data based on this toxicity, whether they were of low concern, whether we had no data, whether there was low chronic oral toxicity based off of animal studies, those where there was some incomplete data, and the identified radionuclides. We then screened some of the data further based off of toxicity level and their ability to biodegrade in water to help prioritize, focus the work done for Task 2. And from this screening, we were able to identify 143 chemicals, which we labeled chemicals of interest for further review in Task 2 in the literature review, and 256 of them are chemicals of limited concern. And so an update on Task 1, we received comments from the Water Board staff and Food Safety Panel. We've incorporated all these comments, and we're currently in the process of producing an ADA compliant document for posting on the Water Board website for public review. So moving on to Task 2, well, actually, let me stop. And I know in the agenda there is time for questions, comments, so I'll allow some if anyone would like at this point. No? Okay, that's kind of what I thought here. So Task 2, which is more of the more recent work, which is the literature review focused on the chemicals of interest. So we've provided a draft to the Water Board staff, and I believe it's been distributed to the Food Safety Panel for comments. But this is relatively recently. We've not received any comments yet. But what we did want to do is just very briefly go through the literature review, provide some major findings or results to give people a bit of an idea of what they might expect. So we started the literature review with this guiding question of what is our understanding about the use of produced water to irrigate food crops in the context of potential impacts to human health. And the literature that encompasses some of these is rather vast. So we identified some inclusion-exclusion criteria which helped to focus it for this review. Exclusion criteria and inclusion criteria based off of date, the method of extraction, location in the English language, and the types of publication. And this has been presented previously at other meetings. So we reviewed a number of different potential sources. I'm not going to go through each of them, but I believe these slides are going to be provided for people to take a look at, and the literature review will be provided at some point in the future as well for other review. So just to give an overview of the structure of this literature review, we have 14 sections, including the references. Basically, the substantive parts are a review of produced water reuse for agricultural irrigation, a review of water quality and other known ambient levels, the sources of these chemicals, some of the fate and transport issues which relate to these in the environment and the agricultural setting, degradation transformation products, plant uptake, a review of the available toxicity data that we further reviewed in this literature review, and then some review of radionuclides. So basically the results and major findings of this are for those things that we're able to monitor for. These are known chemicals. They have many uses outside of oil and gas, and the levels don't appear to be significantly different from other exposure sources. When we look at these chemicals and we look at the use of produced water for irrigation, the major finding here is that our ability to use produced water for irrigation is really dependent on the treatment and the water quality. So these can be water quality issues like salinity, metal content, and other hydrocarbons, and treatment can include things like reverse osmosis and dilution. So for fate, transport, degradation, and plant uptake, we've advanced our understanding of this topic. Much of the literature here is focused on contaminated lands. We've identified that this is a rather complex environment, and the state of the science makes it very difficult to predict the ultimate fate of these chemicals in edible crops and therefore set standards. Many of the gaps exist as they relate to specific chemicals in the agricultural setting because we don't understand necessarily how a specific chemical may degrade under the variety of conditions which are present in agricultural lands. With regard to toxicity data, we have toxicity data for roughly half of the chemicals. We need some additional information to fill some of the data gaps, and these include for some of the chemicals like polymers, the size of these polymers, residual monomer information, other physical information, risk communication information that might be found typically in a safety data sheet. Many of the chemicals are also, or there are at least a number of chemicals that are poorly defined, and this needs to be fixed. And then this sort of results in a number of chemicals with missing toxicity data. With regard to radionuclides, there's no evidence suggesting that there's a problem with these. This is one due to documented relationships between salinity and radionuclide levels in these produced waters, and we know that there's relatively low salinity. Within water levels, within levels of water that have been measured to date, the levels of radionuclides are low. And in addition, the literature suggests that the uptake of these radionuclides in food crops are also low. I believe did this even show up at all? I think it double skipped. Realize we missed one slide here. I want to talk a little bit also about results from the water quality data and other known levels in ambient environments, is that there doesn't seem to be much of a difference for those things that we're able to measure for blended water irrigation or blended irrigation water and known levels and sources of other surface water and groundwater and other sources of chemicals in food. We also identified uses of these chemicals both for general use and agricultural use. 112 of the 143 chemicals have very well documented general uses. 83 of them have agricultural uses, and many of them are things like surfactants and the polymers that were identified to have limited information on toxicity. I'll give people an opportunity to ask some questions or comments at this point. All right, moving on to task 3. We have most of our comments from the food safety panel. We're still waiting on some final comments from a few members to finalize the report. Our next step is to incorporate the remaining comments and produce an ADA compliant document for posting on the Water Board website. So very briefly, we have information on a number of crops that have been sampled from 2017 through 2019. 30 analytes were detected. We conducted an analysis and evaluation of the data. We were unable to assess mean differences due to the number of non-detects, but we're able to look at the data in the context of the number of detects versus non-detects. There was no evidence suggesting that crops irrigated with produced water were different than those that were irrigated with conventionally produced water or conventional water. And this is data that was reported in our previous meeting. If there are any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them at this point. Josh, are there any other questions or comments?
All right, thanks, Bernie.
I would like to say that I think it's our intent to circulate the draft of the Task 2 report as soon as we can to the public. And I think we've circulated, well, to the panel. And then once the panel gets a shot at it, to the public. And we have circulated, I think, to the public, the Task 1 and Task 3 reports. Is that correct? Okay. So they're out there, those two are out there on the street for public comment if the public should have any comments.
All right, thank you, Bernie. Moving on, we'll go to item number 7, which is the panel recommendations. And the panel's been working on coming up with what the recommendations are for inclusion in the white paper. There have been a number of discussions going on. Unfortunately, that's not quite ready for discussion in this venue. So I'll just say that we're working on those. We hope to have them together as part of the white paper. You know, and when they become available, and they're in a form that's ready for dissemination, we will get that prepared and do that. And at this time, I'll provide just a little bit of update kind of on the overall public schedule for the food safety item, particularly as we kind of close in on completion of the white paper, which ultimately will probably be the final event of this effort. So, Dale, you'll have to remind me, is it the 15th and 16th of April is our board meeting in Bakersfield?
I'm being told by a little bird that it's the 16th and 17th.
Okay. The 16th and 17th of April is our next board meeting. It will be held at the Kern County Board of Supervisors Chambers in Bakersfield. There will be a small field trip on Wednesday associated with food safety. It probably will consist of going to one of the overlooks on Panorama Drive and looking out over the Kern River oil field. Because of health and safety concerns, we're not going to be able to go into the oil field specifically. But we'll go up and take a look at that, and then we'll probably also go out to Coelho Water District, take a look at how they take the water that comes in. So it will be a food safety tour that basically presents some information about overall what we're doing, how the water is collected, how it's distributed to the irrigation systems, at least for the Coelho Water District. So that will probably be the 15th, the day before the Thursday and Friday board meeting. And then we don't have a schedule yet. I don't have an agenda for the board meeting, but my anticipation then is that probably on Thursday, just to kind of consolidate the two things as close as possible together, we will have an information item in front of our board that basically will be an update to the Central Valley Water Board and the public about the process that we've undertaken doing the work, presenting a little bit more detailed information about the findings and where we're going. A little bit more on the schedule. We may be able to talk a little bit more about what some of the specific recommendations of the white paper and the panel's recommendations are at that time. Certainly, there'll be information that will be presented in the agenda package, which has to be completed 10 days before the board meeting, that will provide a little bit of reading material to folks just as we provided to our board. And then it's my anticipation that the basically the culminating event of this will be at our June board meeting. Yeah, it's in early June. I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but would be basically then a resolution in front of the regional board to accept the white paper. We should have it drafted. All of the public review should be done. Incorporate the comments as appropriate. And the panel's efforts basically would be completed at that time. I anticipate that perhaps there'll be one more public meeting like this, probably between the April and the June board meeting. Basically, when we have a draft of the white paper that goes out for public review, not associated with the board meeting, but we would have a meeting basically to present that outside of the board meeting to members of the public, and the panel can listen to folks' comments and determine whether there are any final tweaks you want to make to the white paper before we present that to the board for consideration, or at least before staff presents that to board in June. That's kind of how I see this playing out. I had hoped that we would be able to have that culminating event in April, but I don't think we're going to be quite ready for it. I don't want to rush it too much. I want to make sure the panel has appropriate time to consider all your recommendations. We work as closely as possible to get to concurrence by the panel, by everybody on the panel, on the contents of the report, and that we also have time to circulate that out to people who have followed this project, so that if they have questions, the panel can hear what those questions and decide whether that might influence your thought about what the white paper should contain. If somebody has a great idea after they review it, then like I said, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to consider that. So that's kind of my vision right now, and I'm certainly open to suggestions from the panel or anybody else if they see a better way to do this. But that's where I am as of this morning. So if you have any input, you're free to give it to me now or or by a separate method at a later time. And that goes for members of the public, anybody in the crowd, anybody on the phone. Or do we have any questions or anything coming in, Josh? Rebecca? Okay.
Clay, it's Bruce.
Yes.
I think this sounds good. I'm glad to hear the strategy in the final few months of this. For the April meeting, are you expecting the panel to be there? And if so, in what role? Just to sort of be there and show up?
Well, I mean, the panel is more than welcome to come. The panel is more than welcome to come and testify. I really see this as kind of a regional board-centric effort, where staff would make a presentation. But if panel members want to come down and go on the field trip, we'd love to have you on the field trip. I think most of you have been out there before and seen this, and I want to be respective of your time, because you certainly have put in a fair amount of time on this so far, and we're going to ask for a little bit more, and I want to be respective of that and not take any more advantage of your time than is reasonable. But we would love to have you. If the panel wants to make a presentation and talk about the process, I certainly will incorporate that into the presentation. So any panel members that want to come and speak, we'd love to have you. Whether what you have to say about the process or is positive or whatever. It's important for the board to hear how we've done this, what we're doing, and certainly panel members, you've lived this along with me, and I'd love to have your comments if you have the time and the energy to do that. The same thing goes for the June board meeting. We'd love to have you all be a part of that. I may have a little something extra at that board meeting, so I'd really like to have you at the board meeting in June if you're able to come. But that's, pardon? I can look them up right here. Carl, do you have them?
I don't have the June, I can bring it up on the calendar.
It's June 4th and 5th?
And it's going to be in this room.
Correct.
Yeah, the June board meeting will be here in Rancho Cordova.
Alternatively, if you just want to monitor what's being said during the, oh golly, that's not true. What I was going to say was certainly for the June board meeting, it will be online, and you can watch it if you don't desire to testify. You don't have to come here, but you can get online and watch it.
And I do believe we will have webcasting capabilities from the Bakersfield Board of Supervisors
That's what I did.
office too. We're working on making sure that board meeting can be webcast and people can follow along, and certainly we can have staff if a panel member followed along and they have a point that they want to make, you could probably email. Dale and I will certainly be there along with Rebecca and Josh. We'll be trying to follow emails and stuff, or let us know if you have a concern, and we would try to bring that up during the course of the presentation. Yes, Rebecca.
We did get a question on the email list when the time comes.
Okay.
So, trying to make it more easy for you to work that in with everything else you have on your calendar. I think we can, either directly or indirectly, you'll be able to participate. I hesitated a moment ago because I wasn't sure about the webcasting from the Bakersfield site, but Clay, as usual, is on top of things.
Rebecca, you had a question? We had a question?
Yes, we have a few questions that came in on the email list. The first set of questions is actually for Dr. Beckerman, and they come from Justin Bass. His first question is, what are the data gaps?
Well, trying to summarize that right here is going to be rather difficult. The data gaps tend to relate to those things which we can't measure. We've discussed that quite a bit at this with the food safety panel and the water board. I think we've also discussed that there might be some other methods that we're exploring and how to deal with those issues.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what are the polymers that you mentioned?
Some of the, offhand, I can't remember the exact polymers, but many of them are things like soil amendments, which are known as swelling polymers. They hold water, and they help to ameliorate the issue of soils getting sort of irrigated or rained on and then losing large amounts of water very quickly.
Thank you. Next question is, which chemicals are poorly defined?
Those that were reported in the list of chemicals with no CAS-RN, and that's available on the Water Board website.
There's two more questions. The next one is, you said missing toxicity data. Please explain what that means.
This is where there are a number of chemicals which, for a number of reasons, whether they're low on their priority list for agencies or they are not reported in safety data sheets, toxicity data is not available.
Okay. The last question is, did you request all of the fracking and oil drilling chemicals? Did the oil companies give you a full list of the chemicals they used? Are you testing for all oil drilling chemicals?
The scope of this work, and my understanding, is that there's no fracking going on in the Central Valley, especially with the water that's being used to irrigate these food crops. So no, I did not request any of that information. All the chemical additives have been declared as far as my understanding is, and those are reported on the Water Board website.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that. I mean, the first thing is that there is well stimulation hydraulic fracturing that goes on in the Central Valley, but it does not go on in the fields from which the water recycled for irrigation comes from. That's out on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley in what's called the diatomites, or the beds that are typically fractured, and those don't exist on the east side of the valley. The second thing is that the information on all of the chemicals that have been used within the oil fields during the drilling, production, exploration activities, treatment, has been required to be submitted under investigative orders issued by the Central Valley Water Board under penalty of perjury for false information and under penalty of fines for submission of incomplete information or late reporting. That's also incorporated into waste discharge requirements, so that as new chemicals are used, it has to be submitted. That is not only from the oil field producers, but also from the oil field chemical manufacturers that may supply compounds to oil companies for which they do not know all of the specific contents. So we believe we have a very comprehensive and complete list of chemicals that are used in oil field activities where the water is being recycled.
He has one last question, and this question is for Clay. He asks, can I and other members of the press go on the April 15th field trip to Panorama Drive to see the Kern River oil field?
Yes, that will be a public field trip. It is open to everybody and anybody that would like to attend. No, you don't even need to previously sign up. To be honest with you, though, I would like to have a little bit of a head count so that we know what we are going to be in, because there may be a little bit of a vehicle situation at a few spots where we need to consolidate a little bit if we can. Unfortunately, the state vehicles that will be used to haul board members cannot be used to haul people that are not active state employees. So that's an insurance situation with state vehicles. So I can't provide transportation for other folks, but I am going to be making a trip soon to Kern County to meet with the folks and put it together, and I'll try to kind of have a mileage log. You know, specifics will be provided of when and where we meet, and then some information about where we go, what the route should be, how far it is, that will make it very easy to follow along. And if you happen to get stopped by a red light, I don't want anybody to run a red light or do anything unsafe trying to stay with the group. We'll have the information available so that we can get everybody there safely. So, but the answer is yes. The field trip's open to everybody. We'll have the information available, and we'd love to see anybody there that would like to come. We have any follow-up questions?
No, that's it from.
Okay.
That's it for the email questions.
Well, I guess we're down to item number 9, which is basically the general public comment. Well, I guess I'll talk about the white paper. I kind of included it, but in the previous discussion, in that, you know, the panel recommendations, we'll talk about the white paper during the information item. We're certainly going to have a draft of that available for public review. What the exact date of that, I don't know. It may be available for public review before we have the April board meeting. And then, but we will, you know, my plan is to get it finalized before that June, I think it was 4th and 5th meeting, where I hope to have a resolution in front of the board basically for the regional board to accept the white paper. But we still have a fair amount of work to do because the panel still is working on specific aspects that the regional board's trying to draft up. You know, recommendations are one of the big things we're working on, and then we'll have to get those incorporated and get the panel's input on that to make sure they are in agreement with the white paper itself. So with that, I'll go to general public comment. If certainly any panel members or any members of the audience that have any questions. Anybody else on the phone or over email that would like to ask any questions? Seeing not, Josh, I'm going to let you go over the action items as they stand. I'll put you on the spot.
We did skip one item in the very beginning. It's the meeting summary from the last, from the November meeting. So we're just going to go over that real quick, and then we can do action items.
Okay, so on the 14th of November, we held a public food safety meeting in this room. During the meeting, JSI gave an update on the MOU tasks, which is tasks 1, 2, and 3, which we also discussed today. In addition, Central Valley Water Board staff gave an update on a working draft of the white paper. That draft was posted to the food safety webpage on November 12th and is available for public view. A video of that meeting is available on the food safety webpage, and a summary of that meeting will be posted to the webpage after a review by panel members and Central Valley Water Board staff. So panel members have been provided with a paper copy today of that summary. If you could please give us comments within the next couple of weeks so we can get it posted to the webpage, that would be great. Thanks. And we did get one more question from Justin Bass on the email list, and he asks the food safety expert panel, do you approve of using oil field wastewater to grow our food crops?
Does anybody from the panel wish to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, to
So
me, that question's a little bit premature. You know, those recommendations from the panel will come out in the white paper when that's presented with the foundational support for why the panel feels that way, and I'm not sure it's fair at this point to ask that question, but I think Dr. Peterson would like to weigh in.
I'm not specifically on the answer to that question because I think that's a panel decision. But I personally was very encouraged by the results of some very extensive sampling. And I never expected when we started this that we would have anywhere near this amount of data to look at, and the ability to look at samples from fields that used processed water, at least as part of it, whether it was blended or I guess it was always blended, and from other sources such as groundwater. I feel very confident that when we make the decision, it's going to be a data-driven decision, not speculation.
So I'll go over the action items for this meeting, and then Rebecca can add any if I forget something. So basically, I got that we're going to post the GSI presentation to the Water Board website. We're going to, when it is available, the Task 1 report will also be posted because GSI is working on an ADA compliant version right now. The Task 2 report will be distributed to the public as well when it is available. We have it right now with the panel, so at that time, once we get comments back, we'll distribute the Task 2 report. The Task 3 report has already been distributed to the public, but when we finalize that report, we'll make sure to post it on the website because it'll be ADA compliant. And then we're also going to work on another draft of the white paper and get that out for public review as well. And that's what I've got so far.
Okay, with that, I'll give one last opportunity for any input or comment. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. We will be sending a doodle poll out soon to the panel members talking about perhaps a meeting after the April board meeting to, that will deal more with the specifics of the white paper, and one last meeting is kind of what I see of this type for the panel. So we'll get that out soon, and for members of the public, we'll try to get that scheduled as soon as possible so that everybody has adequate time to get it on their schedule and minimize the conflicts. I want to thank everybody for their time and input, and I look forward to seeing most of you in Bakersfield. Thank you.
And I'd like to add, while this may be a bit premature, I should give all my thanks to you certainly when the final report comes out, but at this point in time, I thank you very much for the time and effort you've put in. This has been a long journey, and much longer, I think, than we initially anticipated, and none of you have deserted us. We certainly appreciate that. And I think what comes out of this report will really have some use in other sectors, as we find ourselves using more and more saline water and maybe other waters in this valley, or at least considering them for use, we need to do that based upon science, and certainly this provides a good benchmark that we can depart from. And I think we may find down the road we need more work done. So thank you very much for getting us this far.
All right, thanks everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye.